Tango 1 at the top, we are at Pop-Up Vehicle. 10-4, Tango 1, you have control. Tango 1 copy. Stand by. Stand by.
Integrity, passion, resilience. That's what this place was built on. That's what our community is founded on. Don't act like the example, just be the example. This is the home of the greatest fitness community in the world. We're trying to create strong, able bodies, resilient to injury with a gas tank to get shit done. If there's one thing from this podcast, it's about taking immediate action. Find the problem, fix the problem. This is your opportunity. It's either a hell yes or a fuck no. It's that simple. You're doing that to the Tango 1 podcast. Now is the time to take action. Now's the time to do more and be more.
Welcome to the Tango 1 podcast. This episode is brought to you by Stephen Kidd, Financial Advisor. Does your financial advisor take the time to really listen to you? Is your financial strategy personalized for you and your family? Will your financial advisor be there as your life and financial situations change? When you work with Steve Kidd, your local Edward Jones financial advisor, he focuses on what's important to you. You'll work together and use established process to create a personalized financial strategy backed by the advice, tools, and resources to help you reach your goals. And you'll partner to help your strategy stay on track. Contact Stephen Kidd today at 519-734-8599, 734-8599, area code 519. Edward Jones, member Canadian Investor Protection Group. It's a tough one. Welcome to the Tango 1 podcast. I am Tony Smith. I'm a retired cop and tactical team leader. I am the founder and the owner, co-founder and co-owner of the Garage Gym and Tango 1 Solutions. I'm joined by my friend, co-host, fireman, amateur stuntman, and garage gym trainer, Casey Wright. Our mission every week is to challenge you and guide you to create an immediate action plan against your problems and your weaknesses. Simply put, we want you to do more and be more. Our guest today, very special to me, is Dr. Shawn Harrington. Dr. Shawn Harrington, I was going to wear a collar because we had a doctor in the house, but we thought, he's pretty relaxed and he's a brewmaster, so we could have some drinks and relax. So Shawn is a clinical psychologist. He has a private practice here in Windsor, Ontario. He grew up in a police family, which led basically to most of his practice, treating individuals from the populations of first responders and military personnel. He's undergone all kinds of training to specialize in PTSD, and while completing his PhD, he studied psychotherapy in great detail. Like I said, he's a part-time brewmaster. Shawn and I have a pretty cool relationship. I worked with Shawn's dad when both of us were brand new on the police service. Almost 20 years ago, we walked the beat together downtown, so I remember Shawn from when he was a little kid. And then years and years and years later, even after I retired, I reached out to his father, Tim, and he connected me with Shawn so that I could get the help that I needed. Probably a little bit too late, but he's got me feeling a lot better, and we're going to talk all kinds of detail about that today. So thanks for coming, Shawn.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me. I'm sorry, I'm so messed up because I'm used to the guy Shawn's asking the questions to, so it's got me, I'm like discombobulated today.
It's a reverse role for me too. I'm usually asking the questions and sitting back, so I don't know.
All right.
We'll see how it goes.
Well, I hope it's going to go well. It's going to go well, and I know this is a topic that a lot of our listeners and our friends, not just first responders, but anybody who has any kind of anything going on, which is almost everybody in the world, right?
Everyone. Yeah, so there's a type of therapy, and the founder basically says like human suffering is universal, right? So we all go through stuff at times in our lives. We might have periods where we're feeling better or well, but everybody, by and large, has gone through something, right?
Right. So, yeah, so today's episode, man, we want to talk to you about a little bit about PTSD, because we do have a lot of first responders that listen. Anxiety, stigma, the stigma behind mental health, and how mental health and physical health kind of go hand in hand, which is one of the premises of the Garage Gym. And for me personally, like, we can put it out there because, like, I feel like a lot of people just think it's like this PTSD thing, but like anything that's caused you some kind of trauma in your life, you can kind of relate toward what I have. It just is going to be a different kind of stressor, right? So I really want other people to hopefully learn from the experiences that I went through with you and how we knock down those doors and what we can expect with me going further and things of that sort. So everybody can kind of learn from this and hopefully get you some business in a really good way, because if you're getting business, it means one of our guys is getting some help, or girls, right?
Yeah, very true.
So growing up, you grew up in a police family, obviously, right? Your dad, Tim, who hung out with a bunch of cops too prior to getting hired on the police department. and has been around the block as far as downtown Windsor. That guy knew everybody and anybody. What made you just kind of like, how did this develop? How did you get into, like, I know when my dad was a cop, I wanted to be a cop. And was this an avenue that you just kind of stranded for?
Yeah, like not right away. No, it was kind of unexpected. I don't know. I wanted to do a bunch of things, kind of typical when you're young. My dad, he loves his job, loves policing. Was doing well in school, but he was always like, just keep going. You know what I mean? Keep doing well. Keep stay in school. So I listened to him. There was times maybe that I wanted to be a police officer. Yeah, again, I was more of a science guy, and then I took a course in high school. It was psychology based. I loved it. And then I got to talk to Dr. Bill McDermott. I don't know. He used to be the police psychologist. Yeah, great guy. Did a lot of trauma work, like both within the city and then all over the world. I think he went to like 9/11, those types of things. So I got to talk to him through my connection, through my dad, obviously. My dad did peer support stuff with the police, and Dr. McDermott was a psychologist. So yeah, that course combined with talking to Dr. McDermott really piqued my interest. It was a last minute thing. I applied to the university for psychology. All the rest of the programs I applied to were science based. I ended up going with psychology. So.
Cool. So when you sign up for psychology, now within psychology, do you get routed a certain way, or does everybody kind of graduate with a psychology degree? Like, how does that work? Is there specialties within?
I think there's like a child and development specialty. I was just in psychology. If you want to go on and go to grad school, you do like an honors thesis. So it's basically a research project, and then you go from there and apply. So yeah, I was in the basic one with the thesis. I wrote a little project, did a little bit of a therapy study, and then applied to graduate school from there.
And when did the route towards the police officers kind of start? Post university?
No, I think I was thinking about it after meeting Dr. McDermott there in high school, like my last year of high school. Yeah, and then just I think around the same time my dad started getting involved with the peer support. I saw like the need for it. I like hanging out with police officers, emergency personnel. They're pretty laid back people, right? Kind of tell it as it is. So I appreciate working with that population, and kind of geared things from there.
All right, so Tim, your dad, Timmy Ho was he was, I don't know, maybe 10 years older than me. So when he got hired, he was in his like mid-30s and I was in my mid-20s.
He was 39.
Was he 39?
Yeah, I think he turned 40 at police college.
And he had to jump in on the bicycles with me, and it was like an eye-opener for him. It was an eye-opener for me. But the first thing I learned, and we've used this in other podcasts, especially speaking on the racial terms a couple weeks ago, I learned from your dad, I learned a lot, is one was like his ability to relate to even like somebody would be driving by and you would think that's the lowest of the low type of person, and your dad could go over and a guy who's been living on the street, somebody that other officers or other people would demean, your dad would just be able to relate to these guys.
Yeah.
And he was like the king of catching bees with honey. He would just lay it on and people would do what we wanted him to do without us having to fight, which is probably one of the greatest skills I learned. Then he used that communication to really he really pushed a lot of that peer counseling. There's a lot of great people that were involved in it, but your dad was like the catalyst from, I would say, called the people's version of it, because your dad was walking amongst the constables, still is, I believe.
Yeah.
Right, which in the police service is a lot of trust issues when it does come to seeking help or conveying a personal problem to somebody else. So that was always huge with your dad.
Yeah, he has great interpersonal skills. I probably picked that up from him. And then growing up, I just always saw him making himself available to people, helping people out. So I think, and he grew up in the West End, so I think the combination of growing up in the West End plus, his people skills probably served him well, right, in the job.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we talked about the West End a great deal on this thing, and it's its own little place, its own little community, and I feel like everybody that comes out of it, whether they end up with a criminal record or becoming a police officer, they just seem to be salt of the earth type people that really take care of each other and know how to speak and stick together in this weird way, police and criminals.
So those interpersonal skills that people have that you really can't measure on paper, right? And those are so important, I find, in like, especially a job like yours in like police force, is like having the ability to go into a room, or like one like thing we always talk about at home is like going into the bar and all walks of earth, and through programs through school or having these things, not burning bridges with people.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like I always think like you have everyone in the room who has your back in a fight. No matter what side of the room's fighting right now, if you know everyone a little bit, then you're probably not going to get hit.
You're good, yeah.
And now you can resolve conflict within that. So that's a good skill to have. And what I've heard of your dad, he's one of the top guys for that. So that's great.
So while we're on this topic of your dad, so myself, this is how it kind of all comes to be with me, and how Shawn and I's relationship really started. You know, we knew each other through the Special Olympics and through your father, but really never really sat down to speak until I came to your office.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So I had a real hard go. I've seen some things and done some things, and you guys can all read about those or hear about those another day. I don't need to be telling you about the murders and the dead children in detail, but it was a lot of things building up over a lot of years. And left policing, probably a lot to do with leaving policing was those terrible feelings I was having, and I thought I could escape it. I thought I could fix this all myself. I made all kinds of strides through changing my diet almost 10 years ago to really getting into nutrition and really getting into exercise, and the problems didn't go away. They got better for a bit, but then they wouldn't go away. Then I left the police service, the problems got better, but they didn't go away. And the more I improved, the problems stayed. And I remember it being after Cruise and Brews, and I had been staying at our cottage. I left everybody downtown, took a couple of buddies who had been down from New York City. We went to stay at our cottage. Those guys checked out in the morning, and I stayed to get some work done. And I remember just being the worst and made me feel the lowest I've ever felt. I came home that day. I sat with Danny and my kids, and I tried to write some things out, and I couldn't get it together. And I snapped on one of my sons, and then Danny's like, you got to get some help. Will you please get some help? And so I made a phone call to your dad, who without any hesitation, I think you called me within 2 hours, and we had an appointment. So I think it's really important that anybody's listening understands that it was that easy to get some help. And really, I feel like your dad's going to be pissed that I even bring up his name that he set this up. But I feel like people got to know there's somebody that they can trust out there. So can you explain to me what, one of my biggest holds was I didn't know what PTSD was. I felt like I had it, but I also didn't want to not have it when I went to go ask for help. Do you know what I mean? So what is PTSD?
So PTSD, I guess a Cole's Notes version here is basically, it used to be an anxiety disorder, now it's a trauma. It's categorized as a trauma disorder. So what happens is you have some re-experiencing of the event. So that can take the form of nightmares. You hear that in the media a lot. It could also take the form of intrusive thoughts. So you're just going about your day, and maybe you had a particularly bad incident, and that just kind of keeps coming into your awareness all day. The other thing is flashbacks. I think that's portrayed in the media a lot, especially movies. It's actually pretty rare, but a flashback would be you're actually experiencing whatever that traumatic event is. And sorry, I should back up a little bit. In order for it to be classified as a traumatic event, it has to be a threat of harm or death to you or someone else, and you would have to witness this. I think there are some caveats, if you're a police officer, for example, and you hear of this, you don't have to be present. It could still be classified as a traumatic event.
Which is dispatchers? So
Communicators, dispatchers, yeah, exactly. In some rare circumstances, just hearing a story from somebody, it can trigger PTSD. Again, that's relatively rare. So the traumatic event, then you have a re-experiencing of the event, then you have some increase in arousal. So not sexual arousal, Tony, the autonomic kind of arousal that goes with anxiety.
Don't say sex around the kid here, Casey. He gets too fired up too quick. Anyways, keep going.
So you're gonna when you're reminded of the event, you're gonna experience a little bit of psychological distress, some anxiety. Maybe your heart races. You sweat, those types of things. The other thing, big piece of it is avoidance. So people with PTSD, they avoid thinking about the trauma, they avoid talking about the trauma, they avoid emotions associated with the trauma, as well as situations or cues that remind them of the trauma. right? So like I was listening to your episode, right? Like if you were avoiding like the forest or any like forested area, probably tough to do where you live, but that could be a type of like situational avoidance, or going to the beach or whatever it might be, right? And then the new kind of diagnostic Bible, there's like these cognitive distortions, right? So it's basically like you think differently about yourself, you think differently about others, the world. So it's like, I can't trust people anymore. The world's a fucked up place. Like, it's just a terrible place, right? I can't rely on myself, like things like that. Feelings of like just constant horror or shame, that type of stuff.
Now with like PTSD, so things that I've like, all my information is watching TV or hearing podcasts, things like that. Now, is there more kind of distinction between something, a traumatic event happens, right? Mm-hmm. And a normal response by a human, hopefully, is fear and anxiety of that situation days after, up to obviously a few weeks after. Now, is there kind of a timeline in the way of like, this is just a normal reaction because you were in a car accident yesterday, you should be nervous and scared to get back in the car, and then it's been 6 months now and you're still worried to get behind the wheel? Like, is there like a playful kind of median where to diagnose that, I guess?
No, that's an excellent point. I think he's been reading more than he's telling us. But
Well, I think he's maybe living a little experience here.
I did take psychology my first year of university as a major. I
There you go.
quickly switched that one though. I didn't say I did well in it, but
so if it occurs before a month, it's what we'd like classify as acute stress disorder. So our diagnostic like Bible is called the DSM. So it's in its 5th version right now. If it's before a month, it's classified as acute stress disorder. Sorry. And then after a month, if you're still having those symptoms, checking all those boxes I was talking about earlier, that would be considered PTSD.
So with me, what I found was odd was that when I went to you, there was so many incidents, right? So being a police officer for 18 years, I was on the street the whole time, and like it really doesn't matter because there's so many people that even work in the desks and the things that they're seeing in pictures and videos, and I was like, how the hell are you gonna treat this? Like, I don't even know. Like, I had a list in my phone of like 40 different things that like really bothered me.
Yeah.
And you started with, we just kind of attacked the worst one.
Yes.
So can you kind of get into what the strategy or the tactic, like let's talk about what people could expect if they came to see you in terms of treatment? Because like, I'll tell you guys, it really wasn't that bad. It was shitty. The first couple times was shitty, but it really wasn't as bad as I thought.
Yeah. So we kind of eased into it, right? Like we didn't get to like the traumatic event for 3 sessions or so, something like that. So the type of therapy I did with you is called prolonged exposure therapy. It's just one type of PTSD therapy. There's 2 others, EMDR and cognitive processing therapy. So that's what like the U.S. used. Their veterans they use for PTSD treatment.
It's the one you used on me.
Yes, one of the ones. Yeah, and then and in Canada too. So Veteran Affairs, they've been like studied to make sure they're validated to use on individuals with PTSD. But yeah, so from a prolonged exposure therapy perspective, like their idea is like start with the most significant trauma, and then when you basically attack that or challenge that, the rest of them aren't so anxiety provoking, right? Because you're kind of going with the most important, most impactful one. But you're right, it seems weird because in therapy usually we do stuff gradually, right? So it's total opposite to what we usually do.
Yeah, like you said, we eased into it, but like my entire treatment was 8 weeks, perhaps?
Yeah, 8-9 weeks, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't like, it was not what
How often, like 8 weeks, is that 8 sessions? Is that every day? Is that...
I went once a week.
Once a week, yeah.
Right.
You were, I'm not just saying this because I'm on your podcast, but you were an ideal client. Like you really did what you had to do. You weren't, I know you might have felt avoidant, but you weren't that avoidant of like doing things. So I think it progressed quickly.
Well, that's good to know. I progressed through it. So one of my fears going to you, maybe the biggest holdup, and I feel like it's weird, but I've said this to you before, and I want to know if anybody, I know you can't discuss with other people, maybe you can give me a broad answer,
Yeah.
is that I was so worried that I was going to go there and you're going to say I didn't have PTSD. And I was going to feel like, what the fuck is wrong with me then? And that was one of my biggest holdups. I know people think the stigma and worried about what other people think.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of over that. Like, I didn't really care what other people thought at this point.
Yeah.
I needed to fix this for me and my family and for this business so I could be a better leader to all these people. Is that something common that you hear or not?
Yeah, it is pretty common because like PTSD, it's not like, you know, a diagnosable like medical disorder, right? It's like people are generally come in, I'm feeling shitty. I'm a first responder. I've seen this stuff. Like, I don't know, maybe I have this, maybe it's not. And it's like, what if you don't? Then what do I do next, right? Is probably the question. Or
Yeah.
was that, I don't know if that was the case for
That
you.
was
but
definitely going through my head, yes.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon, and yeah, along with the other things, people don't want to seem like they're faking, you know, they don't want to be called like a liar or a faker, that type of thing, right? That's a huge concern.
So I guess I said I wasn't concerned with the stigma, but I was concerned with that like I didn't, you know, when I hurt my ankle, I busted my ankle, or when I hurt my back, or I tore a forearm grabbing somebody before, like those are all injuries you could see. And I think maybe one of the things that kept me away from getting any help while I was there was that I didn't want to be forced off the road. Because I didn't want to be, because I know there are, unfortunately, like the honest to God truth is, like this in every job, there's people who fake back injuries, there's people who fake mental health injuries, and I didn't ever want to be considered one of those people. So that was one of my biggest fears. That was my biggest fear, probably. So if that's stigma really related, but that's got to be in other first responders and other nurses. When I say first responders, I really mean nurses, jail guards. I mean all those people who are dealing with like the hands-on of life and death.
Yeah, especially when it's work related, right? So if like, you know, the treatment I use with you is originally developed for people who are sexually assaulted, like survivors of sexual assault. There's not really like a work component to that, you know what I mean? Unless you were unfortunately assaulted on the job. But when it involves work, then that stigma is like, oh, are people going to think I'm a faker? Or do I, you know, even people question themselves, do I have this? So yeah, a lot of the beginning of therapy is like, listen, you have this is why, this is what's normal. These symptoms map on to PTSD, right?
So to ease people's minds that are considering getting help, and their concern is my concern that I had just demonstrated, what would you recommend? Like, I know I asked you during one of our sessions that like, hey, would you have ordered me off the police service? And I think your question was, I don't think so. Like, or your answer was. So like, I want people to understand they can go to you and it's not going to go, let's just explain what happened.
Yeah, so I have no dealings with your
obligations.
Workplace, right? Even if you're under like WSIB, for example, because it happened at work, I communicate to WSIB. They never communicate to your employer. You know, if they know you're under the traumatic stress, that it's kind of up to them. They can do certain things to ask about your ability to do your work. But if your medical professionals deem that you can do your job without risk to others, then they have to listen to that, right? So it's all dependent on the case. Like I've treated people who are working, right? They continue doing their jobs, and then I've treated others who weren't able to do their jobs, unfortunately.
Right, and your only obligation is if you think that they're going to be a harm to themselves or somebody else, correct?
Correct.
Then you
correct.
need to step in.
Yeah, there's other things that are probably a little bit more rare. So if you had anxiety to the point where you couldn't concentrate and you had a job where you really needed to concentrate, that could be a possible danger, those types of things. But again, that's relatively rare.
And is that something you find, again, can't be too specific with things, but is that something you find where like people come in, you hear their story, and like maybe it is as simple as like they're blowing it up more than they think, it's not as serious as it is, and it's like a quick few session thing, and then they're back at it? Like, is that something normal that people shouldn't be too concerned about, like to go in for one session and vent and get it out and then continue on?
Yeah, it depends on the severity. So with PTSD, it'd be tough to just see you in a session. But if you're dealing with something else, like, yeah, you can, Or if you just want to check in, hey, am I doing okay? Like, I've had these symptoms. Is this normal? Like you were talking about earlier, there's some normal things that'll happen if you have like a shitty call, right? Like you know, go to a call and there's like a dead baby, or, you know, that's not normal stuff to see. So you're going to have a reaction. And some of that's totally normal in the short term, right? So it's definitely okay to check in. You know, if you're just like, hey, am I okay? Is this normal? What can I look out for? How can I look after my mental health? That's totally appropriate.
And I think too, for like new people coming into like the police force, like your situation is being on the police force for 20 years and seeing piles and piles of things with that. And then now, like for my situation is being newer to like first responding and fire and stuff like that. Now I'm kind of being introduced to some of these things and seeing some of these things. What are kind of steps to take right up front before things like that build up?
So yeah, just like doing things in your daily life obviously can help. So you guys are about fitness, obviously. That's a great thing to do. Like maintaining a good schedule and routine, looking after your sleep, making sure you have somebody you can like confide in, right? Whether it be a romantic partner, friend, taking some downtime to relax, you know, just not keeping things in all the time. If that's talking to coworkers too, that's a good outlet. All of these things are helpful, right? And then if you wanted to reach out and establish a relationship with, you know, a psychologist, counselor, social worker, that's a good thing too. That way you can find out if it's a good fit for you. You know, do we click? If you don't, maybe you could find someone else. It's no big deal. I'm not under the impression that everybody who comes into my office is gonna like me or we're gonna click, right? At least you have that relationship so that if you do have a situation down the road that necessitates you going to a psychologist or counselor, you have a good relationship already, right?
Okay, so one of the things I would say for a guy like Casey and anybody else who's young, we have a lot of young police officers who come here, you know, Kieran, yourself with fire, and like so many nurses, and there's been a handful of police officers get hired out here lately, is I want to make sure that you guys don't get like me. Like, I don't want you to feel like there's somewhere, like the only way to leave is to take that damn uniform off. Because like, we need police officers, we need first responders, we need firemen, we need nurses, we need all these people to do this job, and they have to be mentally right. And one of the things that came up in our discussion, our racism discussion, actually, in our talking about equality and discrimination, was some of the race relations that are going on in this world right now, I think are very much stemmed from police officers not getting rotated out, not getting, they're becoming burnt out. And I think we're really lying to ourselves if we're saying that you're not, maybe not in Windsor because we don't have the density of populations of, of black people. So that maybe if you're working in a neighborhood in Atlanta where, you know, your 90% population is black people and you're going to crime, you're not going to the good people. So there's a lot of good people in those 90%. I believe of the 90%, there's like 1% of criminals. This is like what the world says, right? And 1% of all people are criminals, not just like in that race. But if you're going to only the bad people's houses, I think that's what people don't realize about cops is like, we're really only going to the bad people's houses over and over and over. So you start to associate that face, right? No matter what it is. And that's unfortunate. And like for us in Windsor, it's not so much the black face or the Middle Eastern face. It's just the face of crime, or like walking into like a low income neighborhood gives you that anxiety that like you feel like the fight is about to be on. And I think like we really need to start rotating some people out and spending more time. I know for me, one of the incidents we talked about was a murder that I walked in on. So I actually walked in on somebody being murdered. I pulled the guy off. He was raping her and had murdered her. And there was nothing. There was no interaction. There was the check-ons by a couple of my friends, but there was no actual official, in my opinion, like, if you just made it mandatory, if I was forced to just go sit in your office, whether I talk or not, at least I'm in there and maybe I will say something and maybe we will get somewhere. I don't know, what's your opinion on how we can stop people from getting to that point?
Yeah, I think the rotating out, like you said, is a great idea. You can't sustain that level of like, you know, vigilance and like seeing all that stuff for a long time, right? It's terrible stuff like that first responders are seeing. That's the whole point. I think when we started, I was like, listen, this shit is not normal, right? Like, it's not normal what you're seeing. Your response to it, your brain is doing what it's supposed to do. It might feel abnormal to you, but that's the normal part, right? So I think, yeah, like rotating people out is a great idea. I don't know, you know, that's hard to do, I guess. Like, politics are involved and whatnot, and money, right? I think we, you know, talking, just, so one thing we're trained to do as psychologists is one of the best things you can do for, I don't know, not being stereotypical or biased is to acknowledge your biases too, right? So, you know, okay, yeah, maybe I'm a little bit biased when I see a guy who looks a little bit disheveled or something, right? That's kind of inherent in policing, I think. You know, it can apply to race too, right? Like, okay, maybe I'm a little bit intimidated by larger black men, right? I mean, that's not, it's just acknowledging things. I had someone call me the other day. I thought it was like an Indian fellow. I thought he was going to ask me if I wanted my air ducts clean, because we tend to get those calls a lot here. And it was actually somebody looking to set up my bell, right? So I was automatically going to be dismissive because I heard the voice. That's not right, you know? It's just acknowledging some of these biases you might have. And by acknowledging them, then you get to work on them and be aware of them, right?
Yeah. We should have had him in last week with this whole thing. And that was a great talk with Irene. But
yeah, that and like, I know we talk about it all the time, is like decompressing. And decompressing doesn't have to be with a psychologist per se, but it could be with your partner. Like, one thing I know I've been lucky enough in some of the situations we've been with our fire department is you go to a somewhat traumatic event, right? Things that not the everyday person sees.
Right, exactly.
And before you even leave the scene, one of the captains brings you aside and, you know, you shoot the shit and you talk, and he kind of feels you out a little bit. Mm-hmm. Then before you leave again, one of the other, you know, more senior officers are talking to you. And even little things like that even in the time, you know, like, maybe I'm fine, it was this, I don't have much to say about it. But just having that kind of there and having the availability to call somebody and having those numbers in your phone, or being able to just talk about that stuff, or even in the police department, if you get back in your squad car and you're with a senior officer or even a junior guy, and just take that, you know, quick conversation and be like, it's kind of fucked up. Yeah. And move forward. At least now you've acknowledged it, and it's not burying itself into your brain. Yeah,
so like, you know, I'm gonna make this nerdy, but from a psychological perspective, right? You're getting
That's why you're here, Shawn.
Yeah.
Make it nerdy, Dr. Shawn. Go nerd out on us.
So 3 nerds at a table.
You're getting the social support, right, from like the captain or the senior officer, right? And then what else is he or she doing? Like, they're normalizing that, like, hey, this is fucked up, right? By coming to talk to you and seeing if you're okay and feeling you out. Whereas before, maybe the old days, it would just be like, whatever, you wouldn't talk about it, or it'd be like, suck it up. And then you'd be left thinking, like, am I the fucked up one here? Like, this isn't normal. I didn't sleep last night. I was thinking about this, right?
Yeah, I think that is kind of a funny thing with the normalizing it, and like how Shawn put it. I remember, so for you guys listening, like that little description I gave to you is about 2 seconds of the whole story, and honestly not even the one that bothered me nearly the most. That there are many that keep going, and we could go on that all day. But I remember describing a couple of these incidents to Shawn, and he looks at me and he goes, now does any of that seem normal to you? And you're like, the only thing normal about this is that you are fucked up. Of course you're fucked up. Listen to what you just told me. And, you know, and you presented it to me, and I was very, like, surprised that one of the ways that you treated this was we had an app on my phone, and I had to record myself every time. And then my job over the next week was to listen to this thing as many times as possible. And, you know, and then I would come back in and we would talk about the same thing again.
Yeah.
And then I would listen to it again all week. That was the oddest way of dealing with it, in my opinion, but clearly effective. I'm not sure. Could you explain how that even works, or what the strategy is?
Are you recording the, like, bad situation? Is that what you're talking about? So, like, you would record, like, the event, and then now you're listening to it over and over again?
Yeah, he would pop me a question, and in his question, like, typical. That's one thing that just like TV. He's like, tell me what you're thinking, right? And then, you know, he'd be a little bit more specific, and then I'd go on, and then he'd throw little fillers in, or how did that make you feel? What did this do?
Yeah.
And like so it'd be recorded. on voice record, and then I would just listen to it in my headphones when I had some quiet time to myself over the course of the next week, and then we'd do it again over and over.
Yeah. So the like principle behind that is the avoidance, right? So if the more you avoid, like the more it perpetuates the PTSD symptoms, right? And the idea behind that is like those intrusive symptoms where you're having nightmares or you're having thoughts about it, they're not going to go away because you haven't processed it from an emotional standpoint. So that's what I had you do is like repeat the story, and each time like you're supposed to have less anxiety. It's a basic psychological principle, right? So it's like if you're fearful of something, you imagine like a hill, right? So if you avoid it, you drop down and you go back to the start of that hill. You're always going to feel the most anxiety that you feel right at the top of that hill. But then if you start going through it a bit, so you start talking, right? You get over the hump of the hill, and then the next time you do it, that hill gets a little bit smaller, right? So the principle behind that is habituation. Basically, you don't have as severe or significant of anxiety or an emotional response. So like listening to your episode, you had like free therapy basically.
Yeah, definitely.
You went in with the wolves, right? You started off this is more gradual. This is what we usually do in psychology. You started off with like the pups or whatever, right? And you kind of graduated. Maybe you were just looking at them first, then you're in the pen with them, those types of things, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly like what you're describing is what we did, but just in a day kind of situation where it was like the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the zoo and we're going to go see elephants and giraffes, and then, oh, look, there's a cage of wolves. And then it's like, okay, let's go a little bit closer. And then, okay, I have this wolf on a leash now. Come inside the cage. And then it's like walk to it, and then it's pet it, and then by the end of the day, wolf's off the leash, I'm running around with it, right? So it's just like, it's gradual, but once you hit that peak, and then now, like for me, for that instance was now being around that, I wouldn't say it cured me of fear of wolves because I'm not going to see one in the wild and go up to it. Mm-hmm. But the big thing with that was correlating that to dogs. And then now when I see, a dog in a house or in a backyard, I'm not hesitant to go up to it and approach it. And if it comes at me in a quick state, I'm not first instinct to just sprint away.
Yeah, and if you hadn't done that, though, you wouldn't get that incompatible information that, like, hey, dogs aren't so dangerous. Maybe wolves aren't as dangerous as I think in captivity, right?
Don't go up to them still.
Yeah, don't.
Nobody.
Don't do that. Yeah, and that was the other piece of the treatment, too, right? It was, I had you do some things like identify some situations that were anxiety-provoking, and we did that in a more gradual fashion, right?
Like, so go ahead and talk about that. Like, you got full carte blanche to talk about my situation if it's going to help some other people, so you're not violating anything.
Yeah, well, we don't have to get into specifics, but the other part of the treatment is basically doing those things, those situations you avoid because they're anxiety-provoking. So if that was, going to a certain area of town, being around, like, a certain type of person, or anything that basically caused you anxiety as a result or reminded you of the incident.
Yeah, so for me, for you guys and girls listening, if you want to like kind of, maybe you can relate some of this if I got more into my symptoms. So for me, symptoms, avoidance was a huge one. I thought that was the way I was curing it. I actually even wrote an article about it, got published in the Jim Jones stuff, was about how avoiding triggers was really helping me, and it did for a very long time. It really helped me. Avoiding triggers, which were like watching movies, man. Movies used to mess me up, and TV shows still do. I don't watch too many of them. It's a waste of my time. But that was one of your recipes. Like, go watch TV. Like,
go watch Cops.
So yeah, but watching shows like Cops or like The Shield, or I remember like watching a movie on an airplane and a cop was murdered, and I remember just being right back at the scene at Atkinson, and I'm on my way to Vegas and I'm crying in a freaking airplane, and I didn't have flashbacks too often. They weren't really a problem for me. It was, for me, I remember one time waking up in the middle of the night, my son was screaming, and I had way too much to drink that night, and I sprinted into his room, and I remember like I was grabbing him and I was searching his little body for stab holes. And Danny came in, and I remember just being like absolutely freaked out, and she's grabbing my shoulder and she's like, it's not, you're fine, he's fine. And I just like, I remember that was one of the most like vivid memories I'll ever have of kind of the terrors and things that I went through. But usually for me, for some reason, it was like more so like the day after a real high. like the cruising bruise, or like I remember talking a lady off a ledge. It took like 9 hours. She was up on a 24th balcony, and I end up after 9 hours jumping out, smoking her arm off the railing and ripping her back into safety as like my friends and my partners jumped on me with their ropes. I was on the patrol, and the TAC team was actually there to back me up, pulled me in as I pull in this girl. And I remember that being one of the hardest nights of my life. What is with that? Is it the adrenaline dump after that puts you back in a bad spot?
Yeah, probably, right? You're going back to that like rest and digest, like that homeostasis, right? From the fight and flight. So you have more time to like think and contemplate things. When you're in that fight or flight, you're not thinking a lot, right? In fact, those things shut down. Like it's basically like run or fight, right? So all those unnecessary functions in your body are just gonna shut down, including your cognition. Afterwards, you're tired. You probably don't have as many resources to deal. Things pop up easier when you're tired, right? Or you're exhausted. So that's probably what's happening.
Oh. Okay, so before we move away from the PTSD and take a little break, just at what point should a nurse who's listening, or a fireman, anybody who's listening, if they're talking about this PTSD and something they've been through that's bothering them, at what point should they be seeking professional help? And maybe what steps should they take first, and then?
Yeah, I think if you're concerned about it, or your family members are concerned, you see changes in your behavior. So if you're not sleeping, you're irritable all the time. I mean, that's just one thing, right? In combination with thinking about whatever the event was all the time, then yeah, you should probably reach out. A good first step, if the incident occurred relatively recently, give it some time. Some of that stuff's normal. If you find it doesn't go away, definitely reach out. You can, lots of workplaces have EAP or peer support. You can go that route, or you can just, look up people in the community, do a quick Google search. If you're looking for a psychologist, the College of Psychologists in Ontario, if you go to their website, you could just like plug in your city, and they'll give you a list of the psychologists and their specialties. So specialties won't give you too much. It won't say like, oh, they specialize in PTSD. It'll say like child, adult, rehabilitation psychology. But safe bet, like, someone who deals with adults, they might be able to treat you for PTSD or whatever's going on.
At one point, I think like one thing I know our main focus today is on, more direct situations with like first responders, military, that seem very heightened in the experiences. Mm-hmm. But now, like, one thing, like, I know a lot of people aren't in those situations, and they're just everyday people who might get into a high stress situation that may be an everyday thing for a cop or a fireman, but aren't for, again, your average day person. So they get in a car accident, or they see something traumatic. Like, is it the same kind of steps that you want to take?
Yeah, it'd be the same steps, right? This is applicable to anybody, right? We're talking a lot about first responders because of experience, like your experience, and also because they're exposed to trauma at a higher rate, but this can apply to anybody.
So one of the symptoms we didn't really hit on, I don't think, was disconnect. The disconnect for me was probably the biggest one. I would find myself, one of the triggers for me was being at a party and somebody would want to talk about police stuff. And like, I tell a lot of funny police stories still to this day. I love those stories. But people always want, what's the worst thing you've ever seen, man? Like, that is like the most common question for any cop.
I definitely asked you when the first time we had.
And you're like, and I remember when people would ask me that question, you like, the first one that flashes in your head, I'm thinking of it now, and I'm not even going to get into the details. No, not even worth traumatizing anybody listening about this. But then I'd be like, okay, what's the next one down? What's the next one down? What's the next one? And then you're like, and then when somebody would really press, you're like, and you're like, do you really want to fucking hear about this? Do you want to hear about that little child with, multiple stab holes? Is that what you like? And you would become so angry, like, and then I'd also associate it with like, you want to hear about this, but you're too scared to like, and that's where police officers really get defensive over when you hear people talking about crime, or like that police officers are too heavy-handed. It's like, you really don't know what's going on out there in the world. And that's where like it really would fester, and the politics would fester, the things that would happen at work where the bosses are telling you, don't do this and don't do that. And I think that's where cops really get it. I know what happens in the nurses. I know what happens to firemen. Probably even happens to teachers, right? It's just like you're always together and we hang out together. You really need to break away and make sure that you are decompressing on your own with loved ones and people that aren't police officers, or at least people that you can speak to. When I say police officers, I mean firemen, everybody. Like if you're in that window, you need to step away and speak to them. If you can speak to them as non-cops, then you can continue that relationship to decompress. But a lot of cops, and I'm sure it goes for everything in the first responders, they just go together. They go together, they travel in packs together, they work shift work, their friends aren't available, they're friends that they had outside of the job, and you just become always in fight and flight. That's like we tell people in the gym, like get out of fight or flight. If you're always training hard, you're never on the rest and digest, and you're not gonna grow and get stronger. And I think that's a lot what goes on with us as first responders.
Yeah, like anecdotally, I think like clients that I know they have friends outside of like their profession, like that's a good sign for me, right? Because they're not always talking work and talking all these incidents. It's a good thing, and you're not always in the fight or flight mode.
And so what are tactics? So I know I'll bring up the example, like one of the first times we had met, we were hanging out, exactly what you just described. We're hanging out, it's like 2 a.m. at this point, it's like we're just sitting there shooting the shit, and I definitely asked the question, what's like the craziest thing you saw? And one thing that I always remembered from this is you like quickly were just like, I'll tell you like the funniest thing on the job. And you flipped it to that, and then as soon as that happened, I realized like, oh shit, dumb question. But that I thought was like obviously something you had worked on, but it just seemed like a great tactic up front right away, just to like, in order not to go down this rabbit hole of thought, it's just like, oh, let me tell you this funny story. And then by the time you're done that funny story, hopefully you weren't mad at me for asking that question, but I just thought that was a good response to it. Like, what are other tactics people can do who don't have as much counseling, I guess, and things like, if you're trying to avoid that trigger, what are some quick on-hand things that they can do?
Yeah, so just I'm going to defend you a little bit. You're probably trying to connect and convey some respect, right? So I understand.
Trying to land a job.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
So everybody listening, I know like so many people have asked me that question. Don't think I was mad at you. Like, absolutely not. It just, for me, and I know I can speak for, I think you've treated so many people like that is just something huge that would set me off on a tone. A lot of times I'd be able to respond in that good manner, and I'd be able to switch it, and it wouldn't mess my night up.
Yeah.
But nights like maybe if I was drinking whiskey instead of beer, it would tank fast. And I know that when Danny would hear that question be posed to me, I could see her eyes, because I know that she knew that it was going to be a long night for us.
Yeah.
And so, what do you think there? Let's go ahead. I had to apologize to people who might have got offended there.
No, thanks. So Tony, you're right. Like pretty much every first responder has had like PTSD issues that I've treated. They say the same thing. They get that question all the time, right? And it bothers them. Some people have gone off, right? They're like, oh, what do you want to talk about first? You know what I mean? They start like listing things, like understandably. But I think a perfect way to deal with it is to give them a funny story, because that's what they're trying to connect, and they're trying to convey respect or appreciation. So tell them a funny story. It's not going to be bad. You know, they'll enjoy that. You could also just say, yeah, you don't want to hear that, right? Like, and just leave it at that, or turn it back on them. You know, just talk about them. People love talking about themselves, right? So those might be a few little strategies in the moment to deal with that.
Yeah, it seems as first responders, people just always want to talk about your job. Like I remember even hanging out with Luke Wilson, who plays in the NFL, or my old teammate Brett Romberg playing in the NFL, like going and sitting at tables with these guys who played football, and all I want to hear is about cool stories about like their games, and they want to talk about police shit, and you're like, oh my god, even you guys, like this is like, it's not that cool. I promise you, it's not that cool. But yeah, telling the funny story was always a good way to get out of it, and switching up the dialect. But it was always the guy that was like already made 5 different comments about the police being shitty, that then he would ask you that question after I had a bunch of drinks, and it was like, the old me wanted to smash his head off the table, but the new me would breathe and take my exercises and get out. So you've helped me with that. I never took action on the smashing the head off the table, but I remember leaving many parties because Danny was worried that was what was going to happen.
Like taking you by the arm?
Yeah. She'd grab me. I'd feel the grab by the bicep, and She's got a firm grip, and then we'd be out of that party real quick. So let's take a second here. We want to recognize Axel Films, who's making this production here on YouTube today. Axel is a video production company. Fill up your drinks, boys. Providing creative strategies and powerful video marketing campaigns for brands. They provide creative video services, small and large companies alike. They've worked with us and brands just like the Garage Gym as Casey pops a beer. So if any of you brewers want to get in with these guys, they'd be great. They've worked as high up as the Toronto Raptors. If you're a motivated business owner and you're looking to launch a new product, Axel has the experience, the know-how to bring attention to your brand through creative video marketing. With Axel Films, they will focus on your goals and use their creative storytelling to introduce your brand to the world. So if you're interested, visit axelfilms.com to learn more and tell them that Tango One sent you. After years, especially after being there for years, or they're so disconnected, because that's what I would find. I'd go into these houses and there'd be this crazy shit going on and it wouldn't even rattle me at all because I'd be so disconnected from the situation where one, it could get somebody hurt, but that's what also leads into the situations like Floyd. Like that's obviously very extreme, but that's where a lot of these, I think, more minor ones other than Floyd are stemming is from that disconnect, that from police officers who've lost their heart. Like it's like you're so calloused over. What do you think the police services can do? Fire services, nurses, I think, get ignored a lot too. They fucking see a lot of death. Those ladies, man.
Yeah, they do.
So what can we do to stop people from getting there? It's a big loaded question. You should give me that one ahead of time.
Need another beer, I think.
There you go.
Yeah, I think some of the stuff we talked about earlier, right? Like, it's okay to take a break from whatever like unit you're in or division and do something else. I think that's a great idea. It gives you a chance to step back. Just making sure you're taking care of yourself. If you're walking around like a ticking time bomb, like obviously you want to reach out and get some help for that. Talk to somebody. Say I've been having a hard time. Doesn't have to be a psychologist. Anybody. Anything you're dealing with, right? It doesn't just have to be PTSD. Other things you're dealing with, relationship issues, anxiety, that can all affect your mood or your outlook on things. You're gonna take out your anger on a situation, right? Because it's harder to regulate yourself in general if you're anxious or you have some chronic pain or whatever it might be.
So that's where I want to go next. Really, is like, let's get away from the first responders. Let's talk about, the average mom who comes to this gym, the average man who comes to this gym. And what are some of the mental health issues that the most common ones that they may be facing? I would assume depression, anxiety, things like that. And what can they do? When should they be concerned, alarmed? Let's just get into that stuff.
Yeah, so depression's common, like even more common is anxiety. Like we talk about cancer and stuff, right? It's super common. Everybody knows somebody affected by cancer. Like you couldn't, throw a stone and not hit somebody with anxiety or depression, right? So if it's becoming a problem, if it's disrupting your life or your people in your family notice it's disruptive to you, then I would say it's a problem.
What would you define as disruptive?
So if you're not sleeping, if you're angry and irritable all the time, if you can't concentrate, if you can't get out of bed, if you're avoiding things because you're anxious, say you had social anxiety, you're like, I'm not going to any social functions, right? If you're having panic attacks and you're like, I'm not leaving the house or I'm not going to the grocery store by myself. If you're worrying all the time, right? Generalized anxiety disorder, if you're just worrying all the time about everything and you feel a lot of tension, you're feeling keyed up all the time, those are things you're going to want to look in on.
Does that go back to where you're kind of like, if you're concerned or thinking that you might want to get help, like there's obviously anonymous ways to go about getting help?
Yeah, exactly. If you're thinking something might not be right, it's probably not right. Like you don't just come to that conclusion from nowhere.
Because there is a lot of gray area though, right? With like anxiety, like it's natural instinct to, if you have something important coming up, to be anxious or stressed about, or
for sure,
if you hit a low point or something bad happens. I think depression is obviously, it's a natural thing, but it's when what you're saying is when it starts to, when you think it's starting to push past those areas where like, this happened however long ago and now I keep reliving it, I keep going through it, or why am I getting anxious just because I have to do something at 4 p.m. and it's 10 a.m. right now? Like,
Yeah.
those are the cues kind of you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Like depression, if it's like occurring for more than 2 weeks, usually that's when we start to get concerned, right? So if your mood's low and you've lost interest in things and you have no motivation, your sleep's messed up, maybe your appetite's affected, those types of things. If that's happened consistently most days for 2 weeks, that's probably an issue. The other thing is, like, you can go and seek help, and if I think you're doing okay and I don't think it's like a huge issue, I can normalize it for you. Hey, I think this is normal. Obviously, I'm not going to discount your experience, and I'll help you along, maybe give you some guidance. But if I don't think you need to see me, I'm not going to be, take your money and your time. Like, that's not what it's about, right?
I wouldn't think a lot of people would, right? Because like most people, hopefully in that situation, want to be in it for their reasons. They don't want to spend their time treating someone who's not necessarily in need of it, but not that in need. Maybe that sounds bad the way it's going, but like able to confront them and say, hey, normalize it, or let's work through it this way, and then continue on. And they want to. That might be all you need, is like what you're going through. It's a normal reaction.
Seriously though, like, it's powerful. I think that's why like group therapy is powerful. You sit in a group and you're like, oh fuck, that guy thought that too, or that guy's feeling that too, or girl, or whatever, woman. Like, that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, that's what I found about joining some of these mastermind type groups and now running my own, was that power of that group, that it's just like, oh really, like you feel that too? Or like sitting around a table, there is positive of hanging out with other cops, is you're like, and since guys have heard me speak out about it, the amount of phone calls I've got are crazy, and texts and feelers too, like hey, and I remember sending a feeler to your dad, like hey, what's this thing that's going on? And it is true that walking in and you saying like, hey man, like, of course you're messed up, listen to what you just said, was huge for me. And I remember a funny story from this. It's like, so PTSD, you actually like do this like thing, and he like makes a grade for you, and he's like, whatever that number was, like you're just like, oh, you need to hit like 33 on this chart.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, but you're like a 50. You got it full blown.
You've been accepted to my process.
I'm like advanced student. I'm like, yeah. Like, all right,
Where's their accomplishment, though?
I'm all in. I'm really messed up.
You got the tattoo there, Tony? Yeah.
yeah. I'm gonna get on this arm. My kids want me to get tattoos on this arm. I'm gonna get that. It was Sean's best student. So yeah, back on the with the common ones, so depression, anxiety. So now let's go, maybe you can help us as coaches here at the Garage Gym, or as parents, or as spouses. We get anxiety is a big issue in here, like, and I'm gonna say like
anxiety with the FYF though will never change.
Yeah, like anxiety in terms of
Friday,
like
right?
When you tell people like, hey, we're doing a 2,000 meter row in front of everybody, or the Garage Gym games where you're gonna test in front of everybody. It's the reason that a lot of people don't even participate. Is because they're so anxious to perform, and like really nobody gives a fuck what you deadlift. People just want to cheer you on and hope you do your best. Like that is most people, that's all they want for you, is to ever do your best. How can we coach people through those situations?
I was just thinking we need a channel from the special athletes, right? They're just gung-ho to like get up there and do it, right?
Yeah.
The events we've run, and they go and lift, and they're the star of the show, and it's just like, no nerves.
I don't know if you know, Sean's is one of the coaches.
Were you at our the events?
Yeah.
Okay, he just looked familiar this whole time. I knew I've seen him.
no. Like,
I know I've met him. Not in this setting though. He didn't have a collared shirt on.
That's right.
No,
I didn't get the memo. You guys had no collars. So
It's a casual
You're the
podcast.
doctor. We didn't want to show you up. But anyways, let's get into that. So the special athletes, they really didn't seem to feel any anxiety. Like those guys, man, they got up there to perform. They're like LeBron.
So there's things you could do, there's a type of therapy, cognitive behavior therapy. It basically targets how you think, because how you think influences how you feel, right? If you're like, oh, this is fucking scary, like everybody's gonna be watching me, everybody cares, then you're gonna be more anxious, right? So it's like targeting maybe some of those thoughts that just because you think them doesn't mean they're true. And the other part is just doing, right? So like we talked about before, it sucks, it's uncomfortable, but you have to do it to decrease that anxiety. If you don't do it, you're just gonna have that same level of anxiety you've always had. But as we talked about before, you could do that gradually. So maybe you sign up for just like a gym event, like an event here at the garage gym, and then maybe next time it's like, maybe just a few gyms get together and do something, and then you're at the WFCU in front of everybody rowing, right? So a gradual progression.
And I think it's like fear and anxiety, like it's just how you measure it. It's like for like our experience, like we've played sports and we've played in front of thousands of people, and you've done speeches in front of thousands of people. If you're in front of 100,000 people next week, you're going to be fearful of it, right?
Yes.
To an extent. So maybe for you, deadlifting in front of 20 people is that anxiety, and it's the same fear, but it's just at a different level. So it's like it's normal to feel those things, and I think some people, because in their mind they think the stage is so little that they don't want to recognize it, when it's just like your stage just hasn't been extended yet. So it's like when you see, if you were to lift in front of 3 people today, now in 5 weeks from now you can lift in front of 10, and then in a year from now 500, and it just keeps growing. But like that fear exists in everybody. When we teach classes and there's 40 people in there, you feel it a little bit,
yeah,
right? But until now, I've taught 3 classes in front of 40 people, and now I've calmed down.
Yep.
Right? So it's just measurable, and
yeah, it's all relative, right? To the person. Everybody's different, and like just speaking about anxiety and performance, it's a good thing, right? You don't want to be overwhelmed with anxiety over here. You don't want to be like not anxious at all. You want to be in that sweet spot, right? And there's been lots of studies that have showed this.
Yeah, stress is good for us, right? Like a
Yeah.
certain amount of stress is good for us, and I feel like one of the things you said is something we do in here. We just didn't know the word. I mean, normalizing it. Like, hey, I know, Susie, you don't want to get up there in front of all these people, but like understand that everybody else felt the same way you do, and including me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Including me going up to the deadlifting competition in Indiana. Like I couldn't sleep. I was up. Like I was in the bathroom. Like we're nervous. You're also nervous, and I really tried to do that with my kids. Is like, I don't want them to like be afraid of being afraid. Like understand that like you're fearful. Like it's okay to be fearful and to be anxious to do something.
if you're not, then
you
need to.
Yeah, those are the
figure that
people
out.
I worry
Those are
about. Is the
things.
ones that aren't scared. Like
Yeah.
you're not scared to jump off that building. You should be fucking scared. But
Yeah.
doing it is courage. And trying to relate that again to the moms in here is like, that are coming to deadlift or participate in the Garage Gym Games. We try to tell them, listen, you're going to ask your child to do something just like this. You're going to ask them to go to the free throw line or to, do gymnastics in front of you're going to ask them to do something, to do a speech in front of their class. And you're not willing to do it yourself. Like some of that sometimes relates and gets that little push out of people that needs them to walk forward in the face of fear, which is courage, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not an absence of fear, right? It's like doing stuff in spite of the fear. And you want to leverage that anxiety. There's a pretty famous study. It was people who were afraid of public speaking. I was a little bit nervous coming in here today.
I was gonna say, if we want to bring this full circle, it's like, Dr. Harrington, were you nervous before we started today? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I didn't run out the door, right?
No, and
I
you
thought about it. It's a little hot in here, but it's fine.
It is warm in here. It is
hot
warm
in
in
here today.
But you want to use that anxiety, right? So there's a study, people who are fearful of public speaking. They like randomize them, so half they just let them do the speech as usual. The other half they told them that like anxiety would help them perform. Who do you think like did a better job on the speech and were less anxious?
people were told.
Yeah, the people were told ahead of time, this will help your performance, right?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, and it's true. Like you guys
First
go
year,
to
so
a
you
fire,
Pressure,
man.
pressure builds diamonds, right? And it's to an extent,
Right.
but I definitely think like it is good to have that stress. And
Like you go
anxiety
to a
little bit.
fire, or me going to a raid back in the day, or a hot call,
Things are
and looking at
pumping.
the junior officer next to me and saying like, "Hey, you nervous? You good? What are you feeling?" And they say, "Oh no, I'm not nervous." Like, well, I am.
Yeah.
You scared? Well, I am. Like it's normal, man. Like accept it, feel it, accept it, and move forward. Because I'll tell you, I did 10, I don't know how many freaking thousands of calls, over 2,000 drug warrants. I was anxious every single time, and like you should be. You need to move forward, educated steps forward, and move ahead against those anxieties
and it's a good thing, and it helps too, right? Like your body naturally, when your body's stressed and anxious, it naturally zones into what you're going on.
Exactly.
Right? If I'm getting this correct, like it does, start to zone in on something. If there's something fearful in the area, you're gonna kind of go a little blind in your peripherals to focus on this object, and that's not a bad thing, because again, we talk about that deadlift in Indiana, and you go up there and there's, it's not just numbers wise, but you're surrounded by all these like power lifters and people, and it's like as soon as you get up there though, it amps you up.
That adrenaline, that fight or flight
goes, and that helps you with the situation.
Yeah.
Your body takes over as it's supposed to, and hopefully the natural instinct and training wise will help
kick
you
in.
with that.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's your thoughts on like feeding anxiety? So one of the things I always say in here is we're not here to feed your insecurities. And I try to bring that home with my kids. When we walk in and you're scared of a dog, my youngest son is scared, I don't know why, no idea why, scared of dogs. But I'm not there to feed his anxiety. I'm not there to say like, it's okay, stay behind me. And I think that's what we're trying to do in here to people, like, and I see it with children so much, is like parents make excuses for their child's behavior, or like almost like try to tell them like, it's okay, like stay away from this, like instead of like, what's a strategy you can use for kids and anxiety, or like to get them past it?
Yeah, I think like modeling is a good one, right? So if you're going and you're approaching the dog and you don't look afraid, that's a great one, right? The other thing is, just maybe even asking them like, what do you like, in a nice way, not in a patronizing way. What scares you about the dog, right? And just because maybe why they're scared of dogs isn't what we're thinking, right? So getting to that, and just again that gradual approach. So maybe you're outside a fence looking at the dog, right? And then next time, they're petting a dog or a smaller dog or whatever, right? It's just kind of exposing them to that situation.
And something as simple as like, we'll stick to this dog situation, is like, if you were to just, instead of be like, oh, it's fine, you're fine, take the minute to like go down on a knee, bring the dog over to you, give your kid that introduction. Now, instead of like, one, just defending them from it, not letting them face it, now they see kind of, now you're at their level, and now they kind of see this like lighter situation of it. That
Very
could
true.
always, I think, would help.
Yeah, you paid attention in first year stuff.
Yes, you did. And I think that it's like, so avoidance is kind of feeding that anxiety, but also I tell you a strategy that doesn't work, grabbing them by the hand and just pulling them into that is also fuels that anxiety, right? And then takes away trust from you. Yeah. So there's a fine line. Like, hey, it's okay to be, like, it is okay to be scared. That's one thing. It is okay to be scared, but it's not okay to just not go forward here. Like, we can do this together. I used to be scared of dogs, making those relations. Like, I think that's where, from coaching people in here to talking to kids to, even relating to the guys that I'm coaching right now, it's like, yeah, guys, man, the first time I fired somebody, I fucking was, and I still, to this day, if I have to fire somebody, I'm like, don't worry, Case, you're safe. It's like,
stop making eye contact when you say that.
It gnaws at me.
For now.
It's like, I get more anxious over that, or even like getting somebody into a room and to talk to one of my employees about doing something that I maybe didn't like what they did. It's just like, you need to just kind of move forward with it, accept, Dave Hawes was in here a month ago, and he says, feel the feeling, accept the feeling, feel it, and let it run its course and move forward.
And be curious with it. Like, why am I so stressed about this situation?
Yeah, exactly. It's uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous, right? And that's easier said than done sometimes, and maybe this situation isn't right for you to tackle that day, but just keep that in mind and keep moving forward. As you said with the kids, though, you want to totally validate how they feel. You don't want to dismiss it, and then but let's work on it, right? Let's tackle this.
Something easy. Maybe kid just saw the dog lick its butt and doesn't want to go near it.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
But if you don't ask,
This is what happens. You get bringing
if you
young
don't
guys in this
ask, they
situation.
think that, right? You might think that they're afraid of dogs, but maybe they're just grossed out.
Yeah,
or
like,
something,
I don't want
something
that.
random.
I don't want to lick my face.
That's how I feel.
All right, a few things to close it out. So there's a saying, somebody, I think Danny posted it a little while ago. I loved it because I was the prime example of this. Is just because you're carrying it well doesn't mean it's not heavy. You know, and I think I was the prime example of that. And I feel like people need to, like, just because your friend's smiling through it doesn't mean you should check in. You shouldn't check in all the time. Like, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think that should be a normal part of relationships. We don't do it though, right? Just checking in on people, seeing how they're doing. It's totally true. Everybody puts on a mask, right, in public because they don't want to appear, crazy or whatever. They don't want to burden other people. I think the best way to approach that though, like, you have to be a bit vulnerable too. So you have to open up and share maybe some of your struggles with your friends. Obviously, like, people not just the random guy you meet on the street or something. You got to set that relationship up where, hey, I share stuff that I've struggled with or I'm struggling with. I'm a human being. Is everything okay with you? And you can't totally control what the response is, but by setting that precedent, like, I'm gonna share my struggles with you. Hopefully they'll open up.
And reach out to your friends. Like, it doesn't, I think one big thing too is, like, it doesn't have to be your spouse. It doesn't have to be your best friend. Like, there may be someone who you communicate with on a weekly basis that is just under the same kind of attitude as you with things. Is just send them that call one day or message, and then see, that might be the person that, again, you don't hang out with every day, but that's the person that you vent to, that's the person they vent to, and then you can kind of leave your close friends out of it. Like, sometimes you don't want your girlfriend or wife or knowing all your shit.
No, 100%.
So having those, like, I know I have close friends who aren't first responders, but those are the guys that I go to talk to just because, they listen, they hear me out.
Right. And
whether they can relate or not, they give me the time to talk about my stuff, and then it's done with. They talk to me about their stuff, and those are the friends I have, and super grateful for that. And then it doesn't have to affect your daily life, and then it's off your chest.
No, it's true. And sometimes it involves, like, the person, like, your romantic partner or what. Obviously, you're not going to talk to them about that. You can talk to your friends that you trust, right? So, no, absolutely. It doesn't have to be that everyday person. As long as you get to say what you need to say.
I mean, it's speaking from experience. I can say, like, you are my doctor, but I think, like, we've progressed to be more friends, and maybe that's the relationship you go for as your thing, or maybe it's just how it happened with our relationship between me and your dad. But you sent me a text the day of Atkinson's murder this year, so the anniversary of Atkinson's murder. John Atkinson was murdered in the line of duty many years ago. He was a friend of mine, and you sent me a message saying, like, hey man, I know this is a hard day for you. I hope you're doing okay. And on that day, like, this year, I probably, I mean, you've only been around here for 2 of these maybe, but, like, I think I handled it this year better than most, and probably because of the help I got from you. But that message also opened it up for 2 weeks later when I had a real bad day, and I messaged you, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if I reached out to Casey today, and I do this to the staff and said, like, hey, man, you didn't seem, yourself today, everything okay? He's like, oh, yeah, me and Brooke were just arguing, or yeah, everything's good, or, just didn't sleep enough last night. But now maybe in 3 weeks, and he might send me a message because he knows that I'm actually caring, I'm paying attention. So I think the check-in that you send to your friends, and I can tell you from firsthand experience, from you doing it, from others doing it, and I know you've done it for me before with some stuff I've gone through, is that, man, it's not maybe for that moment. Like, you're also setting it up for discussion, maybe further down the road when you don't know that person's in pain. Because some people, like me, wore it with a smile, and you wouldn't know,
right?
Unless you ask, and unless they share, right? So you're opening up that sharing discussion. So please check in on your friends as much as possible. Last thing, so stigma. Like, how can we break that? Some people say it's like going to you is the same as going to a dentist.
Right.
You should do it all the time. Your thoughts there?
Can I just hit on one thing?
Fuck yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what you're here, man.
So you were just saying, like, sorry, I lost my train of thought here. you were just saying like reaching out to people. Oh, that's what I want to say. If you think your friend's going through something, don't be afraid to like talk to them and bring it up, right? Say, hey, is everything okay? Because chances are, if you're feeling that, then they're probably going through something, right? Same with like suicide. People are afraid like, oh, if I bring up suicide, the person's going to think about it. Maybe they'll do it. It's like, if it's to the point where you're thinking, maybe your friend's thinking about suicide, they're probably thinking about suicide. So you should reach out and tell them, right? And ask if everything's okay.
And I think, yeah, the point you made, it might not be, like you might text your friend and be like, who seems like they have things going on, and be like, hey, is everything good? And they might give you oh yeah, everything's fine. But that in its own might be enough for them to be like, okay, someone's looking out for me. And then maybe a week down the line, when things hit another point, they're like, oh shit, Tony's talking to me right now. You know what? I'm going to give him a call. It just creates that kind of door. It opens the door for somebody to communicate with. And that a lot of times, again, not just from what I see and hear, is like that little communication and that conversation can make such a big difference in people's day, and then you don't fester with it, and then it just overall can really change.
Yeah, you don't feel alone, right? You're like, oh, somebody else cares about me, or I can share this with this person, right?
Yeah, somebody gets me, man.
Yeah.
Somebody gets me, or even if they don't, they're willing to listen to me, and again, like a little bit outside of your like inner circle, I think really helps, like some outside perspective from somebody who you don't, do I feel pressure to always be the leader of you guys? Yeah, man, like I do, and that's the truth. And there was guys within the police service that there was no way I could show weakness or would show weakness in front of them to my fault. And having somebody outside that network to handle you and to like do what you did for me, and I'm talking like that was months later, and you didn't do that as a doctor, you did that as a friend, and I feel like because you did that, 3 weeks later, 2 weeks later, whatever that was, I think it was right after the 5K, man. It was again like another big moment, and then I had a rough lapse, and you were there to kind of answer some questions, and again, like I feel like learning. So when you go to somebody like Dr. Shawn here, Dr. Shawn Harrington, like you learn some stuff, and like now you have experience, and I kind of knew that like, hey, I just rode this wave up, the 5K, the front lines, COVID's happening, my gyms are shut down. Danny's due for surgery. Like there was a lot going on, man, and it was just a boiling point. I drank too much. I reached out. My buddy was there to answer, so to be like, hey, like that's normal. What you're feeling is normal. And then because of the experience, the education that I got from you, I was like, you know what? I am gonna come back from this again, and we'll just get back to normal faster. And it did work. So on that note, do you think there's value in treating it like a dentist, like whether you feel like you don't need help or you do?
Like because of the stigma, you think? Like, is that what you mean?
Yeah,
like
just going in and giving your head a shake or a brush or a scrub or whatever.
Yeah, I think that again, that's totally acceptable. You don't be afraid that like I'm gonna try to like hose you and string you along, right? We're busy people, so if I think you're doing well, I'll tell you. It's okay to just come in for a checkup, right? As you mentioned earlier, having a third party, like I'm not invested in like your business or your relationships, right? Like I'm impartial. I'm not trying to sway you one way or another. So that's always a good thing. And like everything, like I know you guys talk about this all the time. It's holistic, right? So, the mind affects the body affects the mind. Why would you neglect one of those pieces? It doesn't make sense, right?
I mean, I think it all starts within. And absolutely, I think you guys need to realize, everybody who's considering this or who wants to go see somebody, is that like one, doctors like Shawn and everybody else, all his colleagues, that I know them all, but you guys are like your dockets are full. It's not like you're going to a business like the Garage Gym post COVID where we could use 25 members. This guy, like, he's not. Your hours are going to get filled up whether you go or not. So you're not there. You want to fix people as fast as possible. You're not there to string them along and get more money out of them or get more time out of them or embarrassment. Like you wanted to get me, man, as fast as I could. Like, and I was kind of like, oh, you know what? Maybe I am ready. And you're like, yeah, you are ready. Go. If you need me, you come back. And that's the relationship that you should be getting, and make sure you connect with the guy that you go to or a girl that you go to, because that's huge too. And, go forward. The
big point, I think, that just keeps, don't be afraid to reach out and help, because like it might be as simple as reaching out to you and then you giving them the advice to, it's as simple as talking to someone close to you. Like that might be the solution.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And then on the other side, if a friend reaches out to you, talk to them. If you don't think you can handle it, find maybe another one of your friends you can refer them to. Don't gossip about it, but maybe, you know, someone comes up to me with something I don't know if it's I can handle.
Yeah.
I might reach out to Tony and be like, this is a third party that you don't really know, but I know he's dealt with this shit. Why don't you talk to him? Or maybe get Tony, call my friend and just bullshit with him for a bit and see what's going on. Because that, it might be as simple as that, just to get people, you know, talking about it and getting out of that slump or mindset that they're in.
No, for sure.
So very last question.
Yep.
Alcohol. Alcohol is like, as we have a beer, you know, we're having a beer because we're celebrating together and we're hanging out and we're having a beer. There's the social aspect of alcohol, but there's also, and for me, alcohol was a crutch. In so many nights, that's how my night ended, and it would end. For me, alcohol never made anything better, and I would like to believe that's probably the standard for most people, is especially when I was down in a dump, it would bring me lower. So when somebody's feeling like they need a drink, what's the step? What would you, is there something there that you would throw out there?
Yeah, if you're feeling like you need a drink, you probably shouldn't imbibe, right? If you can. I'm not saying, like, if you want to decompress, have like a couple beers or something after work, that's fine, right? But if you're always reaching for a drink, that's probably more in the avoidance vein, right? Like, you just want to forget about stuff, not think about it, not go through, you know, your regular routine. Yeah, so it could be a problem depending on how often you're doing it. Yeah.
That's it. That's it. If you need a drink, if you need a drink because you want to smile and laugh and hang out with some people, and you had a long day and you want to cool down, I think that's one thing. For me, it was the needing a drink so I could feel better. And that's what would happen for a couple hours, and then it would.
It's when you're, I think what you're trying to point is like when you feel like you're using it to numb yourself, to get out of that mindset.
To avoid that stuff, right? That's when it becomes an issue. It can be okay temporarily. If you had a shitty day and you come home and, you know, crack a bottle of wine with your wife or something, sure, not a bad thing. But if you're doing that consistently, and the other thing is, as we've talked about, usually you feel shitty, like physically the next day, you don't have the best sleep. So then your resources to deal with that anxiety or whatever you're dealing with aren't there, you know, and they tend to feel worse. You tend to feel worse or more anxious. Messes with your brain chemistry a little bit. You can be more anxious.
Just like your body needs sleep to, you know, to build up that bench press and build that muscle, your brain needs that sleep to be able to build the resilience to handle with everyday stress and make that stress into a positive fuel. That's kind of how I've started to see it, and I understand that for many years that's not how I did it. So like I can't emphasize that enough to people. If you find yourself drinking too much, do something about it. And if you need help, do something about it. So if somebody does need help, Shawn, and they want to talk to you or get set up through you to one of your colleagues, what could they do?
Yeah, they can reach out someone at Paragon Psychological Services. They can call our number. We can best direct them to whoever would be best for them. You know, there's services in the community too, like Alcoholics Anonymous. I think they have a number you could call. Go to a meeting. If you know somebody who's, you know, goes to meetings, you can talk to them, connect with them. Again, peer support networks or EAP, those are all resources you could use.
And if someone wants to reach you directly, where would they go?
So you can call Paragon Psychological Services, 226-221-8440.
Awesome. So takeaways from today's show, man. If you guys feel like your friend needs help, they need help. Reach out. If you feel like you need help, reach out. Okay, and Shawn is here. And if anybody listening, since I first talked about this, I've sent a handful of people Shawn's way. I have no problem doing that, and Shawn will find a way to help you or find somebody else who can help you. So please feel free. If you feel more comfortable, Casey's one of the most understanding guys, wise beyond his years, and he'll set you up. We all have resources, and we will get you the help you need. Take your job seriously, but take your life more seriously. And that's the key to today, I really think. And so thank you so much, man, for everything. Honestly, for everything you have done for me. You've changed my life, and I hope it continues that same route. I understand that I always have to make sure that I have some attention to that, and I'm glad that I have you here to keep me accountable. So thank you very much for coming on today, but for everything you've done for me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And like I said, man, you did the work, right? I just kind of pointed you in the right direction. So
just like training, guys, you guys do the work. We just point you in the right direction. Same thing. Cheers. Thank you.
cheers.